It's great to be back with you again for another week of Global Women Enrichment Podcast. I am sure you remember this friendly, smiling, lovely face here with you. Dr. Betsy Guerra was was our first guest when we started last year. So great to have you back. She is here today to talk to us about relationships. Yes, it is a very broad subject, but if anyone can narrow it down and you can get the most out of it today, it would be no other than Dr. Betsy Guerra.
Thank you, Venoria. Well, do you have any questions that we want to start with? Because as you guys said, this is a very broad topic and I specialize in couples therapy. It's my passion. I also practice what I preach. So I live relationships, not just with my husband, although he's like my first one, but also with the people around me. Right? We're able to apply everything that we talk about today with regards to relationship, even when we're talking about spouses or life partners, where we can also apply to every relationship, family members, our children, the people who surround us at work, in our faith, in our community. So I want to make sure that everybody listening to us knows that whether you're in a relationship or not, this applies to you.
So I'm going to ask the first question because I just mentioned it to, I think, Dr. Brown. I have a very close friend and she got married and then she divorced after 2 months. So my question to you is, how important is counseling prior to marriage?
Oh. When I was doing my doctorate, I was invited to participate in psychotherapy, like have my own process, go through my own process. And I remember thinking like, hey, what good is that going to be? My life is great. I don't need to go to therapy. And my professors were insistent and they were like, it's important. It's important for you to work on yourself so that you can then help other people. So I did it just to please them and because I really wanted to be the best therapist I could be, right? And I remember going to therapy the first day and being like, well, I don't know what to talk about. I'm just here for the exercise. And I start talking about my family and I come out bawling. I come out of that session like shaken, like shook. I was totally shook. And I realized that we all need to work on something. And we all have traumas and issues that we carry with us into the relationships that we engage in and that affect the way we interact, the way we communicate, the way we see the world, and that relationship in particular. So whether it's therapy or any process that allows you to get to know yourself better, to become self-aware, to understand your triggers and your paradigms, which are these belief systems that are so ingrained in us that feel like truth to us, but really they're just a perspective, right? And also understanding the baggage, right? Like what things that we bring from our family of origin, from previous relationships, and how are they affecting our current relationship? Because we tend to do the same things that we've done in the past, even when our circumstances have changed. And that is, it just doesn't make sense rationally, but we do that because our mind is wired to keep us safe. And one of the ways it does that is by staying with the familiar, whether it's healthy or not. So going through that process and becoming self-aware and understanding your triggers and working on changing the ones that are not serving you is really important, not just to entering a marriage, but to choosing a person, right? I think if it wasn't for that process that I went through, I wouldn't have chosen my husband. I would have probably married my ex-boyfriend and most likely have been divorced, right? And I think I didn't have an inch of a doubt when I met my husband. An inch. I would have married him a week later, and it took me 6 years with my husband, like my ex-boyfriend, I'm sorry. Like, I think I did the PhD to not marry him because I kept on telling him, like, oh, when I finish studying, right? Mm-hmm. But with my husband, because I had so much clarity as to who I was and what I truly wanted in the person that I was going to share the rest of my life with, I I chose very mindfully. So in addition to choosing mindfully, and some of the people listening to us have already chosen, and that's okay, right? But for those who haven't chosen, that's the first step. That decision is probably one of the most important decisions you'll make for the rest of your life. And those who have chosen, you also have the ability to say, I do again, and make choices now with your relationship, right? Like you have the opportunity to decide, okay, these are the things that are not working in my relationship, and I want it so badly that I am willing to XYZ, right? Like do the work. And doing the work goes back to the same thing, becoming self-aware, understanding your triggers, knowing how you contribute to having that dynamic and that relationship the way that it is, and what about you has exacerbated the triggers in the other person, or, what do I have to do with this? I always say that the two most important virtues in a relationship are humility and accountability. When I talk about humility, I mean that we go from the perspective of how dare you do this to me, and who do you think you are, to a more humble positioning that sounds more like, I wonder what made him feel this way. I wonder why she reacted in that manner. Like she must be having a bad day, like, right? Like when you put yourself in the other person's shoes, when you humble yourself and you think like, what's going on with you? When you seek to understand before being understood, when you do that, then you can implement the second virtue, which is accountability, assuming responsibility. Well, I can understand why he's triggered by me being late because I tend not to be punctual. And I know that's something that he interprets as lack of consideration. So even though I've been early or on time the last few months and I've been making an effort, he's still programmed to interpret my behaviors in the light of what I've done most of my life, as opposed to what I've been working on the last 3 months, right? So at that moment, I can assume responsibility. Maybe I didn't do anything wrong at the moment, but I did create that idea or that reputation that he's responding to. And accountability also means that we become empowered. Responsibility equals power. If you have something to do with where you're at in your relationship, you have the power to change it. But if you have if you're the victim and the other person's the one that's wrong, then you just sit down and wait for things to change. And I don't believe in that approach, right? Like I believe we're not spectators of our own life and our relationships. We're proactively participating in that relationship. So humility means, let me seek to understand first. And we're not wired to do that as human beings. We want to be understood, but you don't get it. So then we say it 20,000 times in many different ways because we need the other person to understand us. But then why don't we focus that energy on understanding the other person? And the moment that you look at it from his or her perspective, whether you agree or not, you don't have to agree. The moment that you put yourself in those shoes, you can then realize why that person keeps on making the same mistake or doesn't get it or doesn't do anything about it or doesn't do it your way. And you can then come up with an approach that person's going to understand because you're thinking like him or her, right? Like, for example, my husband gets triggered with my tone of voice. I'm Puerto Rican. I'm loud as can be. I don't know how to talk. I scream. And so and he also interprets me using my hands, raising my voice, and talking to him loudly as a disrespect, especially if there's any human in front of us, right? And in my mind, like the last time that this happened, he was with his brother, and I'm really upset at someone else, right? Like our property manager, and I'm telling him like, but this is not okay that he's doing this, and he should have talked to us, and we said something like you need to talk to, and I'm telling him what he needs to do. So then he also interprets everything as I'm trying to control him, as I'm sure do a lot of the men listening to this or the husbands of the people listening to this. And I'm super upset at the guy, not at my husband. But the control freak in me trying to control everything is like, you should have told him this, and that's not okay. And you're the boss. Like, he needs to respect you. what he heard was, you need to man up, right? Like when I said you're the boss, he heard you need to man up, and what, you're not doing this right. What I was trying to say is like, this guy needs to respect you because you're the man. What he heard was something else, right? And then I used my hands and I raised my voice, and his brother was there. Mind you, I don't think there's anybody in this world that knows how much I adore and live for my husband more than my brother-in-law, right? So in my mind, it's safe to do anything in front of him because he knows how much I respect and honor his brother. In my husband's mind, it's a total disrespect for me to speak to him like that in front of a family member. So I remember thinking like, then he got really upset and we had a conversation, or an argument first, then a conversation, I should say. And I remember before having the conversation, I'm like, humility, humility, humility. I'm in the car and I'm thinking like, what can I apologize? What accountability. And I'm like, okay, I need to apologize for my tone of voice, for choosing that moment to do it in front of the brother. But in my mind, I hadn't disrespected him. I hadn't done anything wrong. So I started the conversation with humility and accountability. And that allowed us to continue talking about it. It allowed me to understand that he considered that a disrespect. And then now I have to change my paradigm so that I can see that as disrespect too, because it's my husband, the one feeling that, and I want to honor and love him. So if that's disrespect for him, then I have to figure out a way of not doing that, right? Like even if it's not disrespect for me. And I think that brings us to another really, really important concept in communication, in a relationship, but also in life. The way we feel does not depend on what another person does or says. Never, right? Like I heard my dad growing up saying, don't let anybody rob you of your peace. Yeah, easier said than done, right? And I didn't understand it until recently, that I was like, oh, it's because what other people do or say, or life events and circumstances, they don't have the power to make us feel a certain way and hence make us react a certain way. What gives that power, the thing that has that power is the way we interpret it, right? The story we tell ourselves about what the other person did or said, regardless of his or her intentions. We don't need to know the truth of what they're thinking. The story we tell ourselves is what makes us feel sad, angry, upset, disappointed. And based on that emotion that we experience, we react. So I think it's important to start at our interpretation, right? And there's a concept in psychology called reframing, and I love that concept. I'm the queen of reframing. And that concept says that you should change the perspective with which you're looking at something into a more positive one so that it serves you well. So I always like to think of reframing as, imagine you have a new house and your grandmother or great-grandmother gives you a frame that's like gold and Victorian and black and like old and just not too cute with a sunset. And then you're like, oh, thank you, Grandma. This is really special. And you're like, oh my gosh, I really want to please her and put up the sunset, but this just doesn't go with my house. It doesn't look good. And then you think, like, let me see, like, you know what, I'm going to go to the frame shop, because really what matters is the actual art piece. I'm going to go there and I'm going to change it into a new frame and make it like more modern. And then you take it and you tell the person in the frame shop, like, just surprise me. And when you go pick it up, it's a beautiful modern frame with a gorgeous Key Largo sunset. And you're like, wow. Now you want to put it in your accent wall. Mm-hmm. You don't want to hide it anywhere. Same situation, same art piece. You're just changing the way you frame it, the way you look at it. And that makes all the difference. So as you guys know from our last podcast, I lost my beloved daughter in an accident. And for months, I was the grieving mom who lost a daughter, and I was moping around the world and just with a scarlet letter that read, yes, I am the miserable person who lost her daughter. And I remember thinking, I cannot change that circumstances the way we often cannot change a person. But what is under my control? What can I change? Well, I can change the way I look at it. Oh, yeah, reframing. Reframe that, Betsy. You can reframe traffic. Oh, yeah, in traffic I get to listen to my podcast of Global Women Enrichment. But how do you reframe losing your daughter? And I remember thinking, after I went to a support group where people were defined by their loss. And I remember feeling like, no, I am not going to be the grieving mom who lost a daughter. I am going to be the chosen mother of an angel. I'm going to be VIP in heaven and have all the hookups. And, I just ask her, like, hey, can you intercede for me and just, talk to Jesus and tell her, my mom is going through this and hug me up. I imagine all these things. And I thought, like, wow, I get to be with her all the time. I don't have to wait till she gets out of school. I can be with her while I'm at work. I can be with her at every time spiritually. I can continue to love and be her mother. In fact, I can be a better mom because now she's not doing anything to make me love her more or think that she's cute, like those kindergarten, Christmas shows or all these things that our kids do and we're so proud and excited. Now I get to love her, period. I love her. And even as I say this, I honestly feel so lucky that I have a daughter in heaven. I look at people around and some people may look at me like, oh, poor Betsy. And I'm thinking, you're crazy. I'm the luckiest woman on earth. I'm the chosen mother of an angel. What do you have? I'm gonna top that, right? So when you change the perspective, because I've learned to believe this wholeheartedly, right? And it takes some repeating and it takes some being mindful of, okay, this is the story I choose to tell myself. When you believe that story, you feel blessed, you feel lucky, you feel empowered, you feel happy, and then you act in ways that show that joy, right? So in a relationship, something similar happens, right? You can have someone that, oh my gosh, but my husband, you don't even know him, Betsy. The guy doesn't do anything around the house, or the guy can't keep a job, or all these things. And then when you reframe that and you look at the positive things and you think man, but he's such an amazing dad and he has my back. Whenever I need something, he's there. He's not that good at keeping the job, but you know what? He always helps around the house. He gets my back with the kids. He whatever I tell him, he doesn't even hesitate. And there's value in that. And or maybe it's someone who is not loving, right? And you're like, he's not affectionate and I need affection and whatnot. And there's an opportunity, just so you know, that reframing doesn't mean you don't do anything to try to change that. But the idea is that if you understand that you don't need the other person to give you what you're lacking, that you can provide that to yourself, then you can see the person for who he or she is and what they bring to the table, instead of constantly be trying to meet your own needs and fulfill your desires with another person. Because really, God made us responsible for ourselves, and we are responsible for providing ourselves with our needs. In conjunction with God, I believe, he gives us the grace and the ability to do that, not someone else. So when we understand that, when we're accountable, when we're responsible, we have the opportunity to then honor the people around us the way they are and accept them. Acceptance is a gift. And then reframe, just change the perspective. And once you change it, I feel because we remove so much of the pressure of, you have to give me what I need, that person's probably going to be more likely to do what you need them to do, because that energy, that pressure, that judgment is not present anymore, preventing them from making those changes.
I want to share something with our audience. And, Betsy's been talking a lot about relationships, whether it's your husband or your partner. And one of the things that struck me as she was talking about humility and accountability, empathy as well, and reframing, is that she also works with teens. And my son had the privilege and honor of sharing a teen boot camp with her. And for him, it was about going and learning about relationships as a whole and relationships in high school and friends and all of that. And as I'm hearing Betsy talk, I'm hearing my son saying, yes, Mom, I need to reframe. And using language that Betsy has used. And really, he had the opportunity to learn about how he was being perceived by some other people. So the relationships that Betsy focuses on is not just couples therapy. She does wonders with teens and younger kids as well, because what a benefit to be able, you asked the question, should you get therapy before getting married? What a huge benefit and just gift to empower your children with that before they start on their journey into adulthood, and really understanding what it's about to have humility and empathy and accountability. And when you see something that's out of your control, how do you reframe? And how do you look at it from another perspective? So I think you've done a fabulous job on that, not just with adults, but the generation that's going to be our future adults. And what a way to empower them for the future.
Awesome. Dr. Brown?
Betsy, it's a joy to listen to you. It was, I went back to my childhood as I listened to you. And what Venoria asked is so critical. When I was getting married, I had 3 counselors. That's how fearful I was of stepping into this relationship with a complete stranger. Because growing up, we grew up in the church, you went to school, you did some kind of college, you started working, the next thing was marriage. And I didn't know this person, I don't know his background, I don't know his parents, and here I am saying I'm going to get married to him. And one of the things I struggled with was we work so hard to become the best professional, and we go to no classes, no preparation to be a wife and a husband. And I thought something was wrong with that. So I felt like I needed 3 counselors, and I spoke to so many people. I remember one day somebody came to the school where I was at and just came to tell me it's okay to marry Lance. And when we have our struggles, Betsy, I remember that conversation where this particular person came to see me just to say, he's okay. You guys can get married. So I want to emphasize what Betsy said about humility, accountability, reframing, to encourage those of you who are not yet married to seek some source of counseling before getting married. What do we say to the people, Betsy, who are already married? How do we fix that for them?
We start with humility and accountability, right? Instead of asking the other person, what can you do for me and how can you change? You ask yourself, how can I understand him or her better? How can I put myself in that person's shoes? And how have I contributed? What's my part on this? How have I contributed to that person feeling or acting the way that he or she does with me? And if you do that, you don't have to sit around and wait for the person to change. It's you do the work. And I believe that if you have faith and you live a guided life, like you also include God in that process, you ask God to help you become aware of what your responsibility is and how you've contributed or participated in that. Sometimes we participate just by not setting boundaries or allowing it, right? Sometimes we haven't done anything wrong except, well, I didn't set the boundaries, hence I allowed it. I allowed for him to do that or her to do that. When you assume the responsibility, when you try to put yourself in that person's shoes, you can do the work to change the things that are on you. And as that happens, you can see if the other person's joining in, right? Like typically we lead by example, we inspire the other person to do the thing that we are doing ourselves mindfully, and they jump in to accompany us in the journey and to start doing that themselves.
Right. It sounds like both people need to be wanting the relationship, whether it's husband and wife, partners, or even friends. If both people are not on the same page, if one person is not as vested in the relationship, it can go sour. And I believe that's why we have divorce, because there's selfishness. There is, I want my way or the highway. You go. And I think, people listening to us right now might think that sounds so easy, but humility is not easy. It's not easy to see the other perspective. It's not easy to say God is in charge here and this marriage is for God. It takes two people. And as you're talking, I'm thinking that if the woman is feeling like the victim, the whole issue of abuse comes up, which I know is another session. But the concept of both partners having that humility, having that accountability, and being willing to reframe, and not having those expectations. It's so hard to say that, because you go into the marriage with expectations, or you go into the friendship with expectations, and when those expectations aren't met, you feel dashed.
Or you have children with expectations.
Exactly.
Right, of how you want them to live.
Right.
But I will say real quick to end my part, that even if the other person is not on board, you have a responsibility with yourself to at least initiate the process and take on 100% of this effort, in the hopes that the other person, by you modeling it, will jump in, and then there's two people doing the work, right, as it should. But we can still start the process and take it all on mindfully, without expectation, with the hopes that the other person joins in. If the other person doesn't join in, that's the answer right there.
Okay, so there you have it, part 1 of Relationships by Dr. Betsy Guerra. Stay tuned for part 2. I'm not sure exactly which month, which week, but it will happen. We will do a series of relationship with Dr. Betsy Guerra. Are you game?
I'm in. Okay. I'm in. I just found out, just like you guys.
Dr. Betsy, we are always happy to have you, and see you soon. Thank you, audience, for listening.
And one other thing, Better with Betsy on Instagram.
Better with Betsy
on Instagram. And remember, we always love to hear from you and the topics that we will have in the future. So reach out to us, follow us on YouTube, and reach out to us at GWEnrichment.com. Till next time.